I never thought I'd see the inside of a prison cell, let alone one in La Sante. It was a place I had only heard about in news reports, a fortress in the heart of Paris, built to hold men society wanted to forget. And yet, here I was. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't supposed to be here. But when you're up against the system, truth doesn't matter. Only the verdict does. The day they sentenced me, my world collapsed. 8 years. The words barely registered at first. My lawyer whispered about appeals, about fighting back, but I knew the moment the judge read the sentence. I was already buried alive. It had started with my job. Civil engineer. Good at what I did. I had built things my whole life, but I never expected to be framed for tearing something down. The project was a renovation deal. Big money involved, contracts signed at the highest levels. I was just the guy ensuring the numbers added up, the structures were sound. But when the authorities started digging into financial fraud, they needed someone to take the fall. And with my name on too many documents, I became the perfect scapegoat. Laurent Dubois, my employer, vanished the second the investigation started. Gone without a trace. Meanwhile, I was left answering questions I didn't have answers to. The court didn't care. The jury saw the bank statements, the fake invoices, they saw a guilty man. By the time I was locked in block, reality had settled in. The cell was just big enough to remind me of everything I'd lost. My wife, Claire. My daughter, Sophie. At first, they visited. Claire cried. Sophie asked when I was coming home. I had no answer. Weeks passed. Then months. The letters became shorter. The visits stopped. Life on the outside moved on without me. But inside La Sante, time was frozen. The routine was suffocating. Wake up at dawn. Roll call. Meals that barely passed as food. Work assignments. Evenings locked in a space barely bigger than a closet. Every minute was accounted for, and every guard made sure you knew that you didn't own a single second of your life anymore. I tried to keep my head down. Fights broke out daily. The gangs ran everything. Contraband, favors, survival. You stayed out of their way, or you got swallowed whole. I thought I could survive it, that I could endure it. But endurance means waiting for something to change. And I realized nothing would. The appeals went nowhere. The courts had washed their hands of me. Claire had stopped answering my letters. And Sophie? She was growing up without me. 8 years in this place would steal everything I had left. That's when I made my choice. I was getting out. Once you decide to escape, prison looks different. You stop seeing it as a place where you're trapped. You start seeing it as a puzzle. Every guard, every locked door, every crack in the walls, they're all pieces. If you can fit them together, you find a way out. I started watching. Not just casually, I memorized everything. The guard rotations, the blind spots in the cameras, who got lazy on night shifts. Every prison has weak links, even La Sante. Most of the guards treated this place like a graveyard shift, counting the days until retirement. Some were arrogant, some were cruel, but a few were just careless. And carelessness? That's the key to an escape. My job in the maintenance crew gave me access to places most inmates never saw. The storage rooms, the workshop, the ventilation shafts behind the kitchens. At first, I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just looking. Then I found something. A service corridor near the laundry room, half forgotten, rarely checked. It led to an old utility shaft sealed off decades ago when the prison upgraded its water system. No cameras, no regular patrols, just a rusted metal grate standing between me and an abandoned tunnel. That was my way out, but knowing where to escape wasn't enough. I had to get the tools to make it happen. I started working slower in the shop, dragging out repairs, making excuses to handle screwdrivers, wrenches, even a small handsaw. I couldn't steal everything at once. That would be suspicious. So I took one piece at a time. A small bolt cutter blade tucked in my boot. A thin metal file slipped into my sleeve. I stored them in a vent behind my bunk, under a loose panel I had discovered weeks before. It wasn't much, but soon it would be enough. Timing was everything. If I made my move too early, I'd be caught and buried in solitary for years. If I waited too long, a single change, a new guard rotation, a sudden inspection could ruin everything. I gave myself 4 more weeks. 4 weeks to gather what I needed. for weeks to prepare for the moment I would take my first step toward freedom. But prison has a way of making even the best plans fall apart. And just when I thought I had everything under control, something went wrong. I had given myself 4 weeks to prepare. But prison doesn't care about your plans. Things started shifting earlier than I expected. A surprise inspection. It happened once every few months, supposedly at random, but everyone knew when it was coming. Except this time, it came a week early. I was in my cell when the whistle sounded through the block, followed by the heavy thud-thud-thud of boots marching down the corridor. Tous contre le mur. Maintenant. Everyone against the wall. Now. I felt my stomach drop. They were searching everything. I stood by my bunk, hands against the cold concrete, heart hammering as 2 guards enter my cell. They flipped my mattress, yanked open my locker, pulled at the vent cover. I forced myself to breathe slow, steady. If they found my stash, the tools I had spent weeks collecting, I was done. The older guard, Lemoyne, crouched near my bed frame, running his hands along the edges. He was thorough, too thorough. His fingers tapped against the loose panel beneath my bunk. I swallowed hard. This was it. Then, "Hey, over here." Another guard called from 2 cells down. Lemoyne stood, grumbling, and moved on. I exhaled, forcing my hands to stay steady. By some miracle, I got through the search untouched. But not everyone did. 2 cells down, Jules, an old inmate who had been locked up for 15 years, wasn't so lucky. They found a sharpened toothbrush hidden in his vent. Not an escape tool, but a weapon. He was dragged out, screaming, fists swinging. A nightstick cracked against his ribs, and then he was gone, hauled off to solitary. The whole block was tense after that. The guards were on edge, making rounds more often, their eyes sharper, their movements quick. This was bad, really bad, because I had planned everything around the guards' usual routines. But now, everything had changed. Adjusting the plan. I couldn't afford to wait anymore. Originally, I had planned to escape 2 weeks from now, during a night shift when the patrols were weakest. That was no longer an option. If the guard were already on alert, it was only a matter of time before they searched again, and next time, they might not miss my stash. I had to move on my escape. Tomorrow night. That was my only chance. The night before freedom. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bunk, listening to the sounds of La Santé, the distant hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional cough of an inmate, the faint drip-drip-drip of a leaking pipe. Tomorrow, this place would either be behind me, or I'd never see daylight again. I went over the plan in my head, again and again, running through every detail. Step 1. Get through the storage corridor without being seen. Step 2. Use the tools to break the rusted grate. Step 3. Enter the utility tunnels beneath the prison. Step 4. Find the old drainage exit leading to the river. Step 5. Get the hell out of Paris. Simple in theory. But I knew the truth. No plan survives reality. And tomorrow night, reality would hit me like a freight train. I kept my routine normal all day. No signs of nervousness. No sudden movements. Prisoners who act different get noticed. Night fell. The evening roll call came and went. The guards locked the cells, and the prison settled into its usual restless silence. 22:30. I moved. I reached under my bunk, retrieving the small screwdriver and metal saw I had hidden weeks ago. Slipping them into my waistband, I crouched near the ventilation shaft below my sink, the first part of my escape route. I had loosened the screws already. Now it was just a matter of removing the cover. The screws turned easily, almost silently. Then, the last one came loose. I grabbed the edges of the vent and pulled it free. A dark, narrow crawl space stretched beyond it. I didn't hesitate. I slid inside the walls. The air was thick inside the vent, filled with dust and the stench of old metal. I crawled forward, my hands and knees scraping against the surface. The space was tight, claustrophobic. I ignored the feeling, pushing forward. After 5 minutes of crawling, I reached the other end, a small grate leading to the storage corridor. I pressed against it gently at first. It didn't move. I tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. I gritted my teeth. This wasn't part of the plan. Something was holding it in place. I pulled the metal saw from my waistband. If I couldn't push through, I'd cut through. The blade bit into the rusted metal, sawing through one of the screws. Every scrape of metal on metal felt like it echoed through the whole prison. I froze every few seconds, listening. No alarms. No footsteps. I kept cutting. One screw. Two. Three. Finally, the last one snapped. I grabbed the grate, pulled it free, and crawled through. I was out of my cell block. Now, I just had to make it to the utility tunnel. One wrong move. I kept low, moving fast through the storage corridor. This was the easiest part. No cameras, no regular patrols. But then a sound. Footsteps. Shit. I pressed myself into the shadows between two metal shelves, my heart hammering. A guard walked into the corridor, flashlights sweeping the room. This wasn't supposed to happen. No one ever checked this area at night. Ever. But the search earlier, the weapons found in Jules' cell, had changed everything. The guard took one step closer. The beam of his flashlight swept over the floor, just inches from my foot. I clenched my fists, preparing to make a move. Then, a radio crackled. Patrol needed near East Wing. Possible disturbance. The guard hesitated. Then he sighed, turned, and walked away. I exhaled slowly. That was too close. And I still wasn't free. I forced my body to move again, inching toward the utility shaft, the only thing standing between me and escape. I had made it this far, but I knew one thing for certain. The hardest part was still ahead. The cold air in the utility corridor felt heavier than inside the prison walls, thick with dust and the scent of rusted metal. I crouched low, forcing my breathing to slow as I gripped the edge of the old service hatch. The tunnel beyond it was my way out, if it was still open, if it wasn't sealed like the others, if it didn't lead to a dead end that would turn this escape into my tomb. There was no time for doubt. I pulled the hatch open, the hinges letting out a slow, agonizing creak. The sound made my skin crawl. I froze, listening. Nothing. No shouts. No approaching footsteps. I slipped inside and pulled the hatch closed behind me. The darkness swallowed me whole. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I switched on the small pen light I had stolen from the workshop weeks ago. The beam cut through the dust-filled air, revealing narrow concrete walls and an old drainage pipe running along the side of the tunnel. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself forward. The tunnel sloped downward, the walls damp and slick. Water pooled at my feet, soaking through my prison-issued shoes, but I didn't stop. Every step forward was a step closer to freedom. I had studied the old blueprints of La Santé's underground systems as best I could, memorizing the paths maintenance workers once used. According to the plans, this tunnel should lead toward an old drainage shaft connected to a secondary exit near the outer wall. But plans meant nothing in reality. The prison was over 100 years old, and anything could have changed since those blueprints were drawn. The tunnel narrowed, forcing me to crouch lower as I moved. The sound of water dripping echoed around me, distorting in the tight space. It felt like the walls were closing in. I pushed the thought aside and kept moving. Then I saw it, the metal grate blocking the exit. It was rusted, bent at the edges from years of corrosion. I ran my hands along its frame. It was old, fragile. With enough pressure, I could break it. I pulled a small hacksaw from my waistband and set to work. The blade bit into the rusted metal, scraping with every back-and-forth motion. Every sound felt too loud. I worked fast, my muscles straining as I forced the saw through the thickest parts of the bars. One snapped, then another. My breath came in short, sharp bursts as I used my hands to pry the remaining bars apart. They groaned, resisting for a moment before finally giving way. I pushed through the opening and emerged into a larger tunnel, the air even colder than before. The smell hit me instantly, stagnant water, sewage, decay. I covered my nose with my sleeve, trying not to gag. This was it, the old drainage system. If I was right, this tunnel would lead me toward the outer perimeter, toward the final barrier between me and the streets of Paris. I waded through ankle-deep water, my every step splashing softly against the concrete. My pulse was hammering. The walls of the tunnel were lined with rusted pipes, some leaking, some broken. I followed the flow of the water, knowing it had to lead somewhere. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like forever, twisting and turning in ways I hadn't anticipated. My pen light flickered. The battery was running low. I had to move faster. Then I heard it. A distant noise. At first, I thought it was just the water, but then I recognized it. Boots on concrete. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching. Someone was in the tunnel. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I pressed myself against the wall, switching off my light. The darkness was absolute. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. It was coming from ahead of me. That meant one thing. They knew I was down here. Had they already discovered my escape? Had they found the grate? I couldn't go back. There was only one way out. I moved forward, slower now, keeping to the shadows. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Then, ahead, I saw it, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark. I dropped to my knees, feeling along the side of the tunnel. There had to be another opening, another pipe, anything I could use to hide. My fingers found a gap in the wall, a small maintenance alcove barely large enough for me to squeeze into. I pressed myself inside just as the beam of light swept past. A voice echoed through the tunnel. Il est là quelque part. Ne le perdez pas. He's here somewhere. Don't lose him. I bit down on the inside of my cheek, forcing myself to stay still. Two figures moved past, their flashlights scanning every corner. Guards. Not just one, but two. They weren't running, which meant they weren't sure where I was. Not yet. One of them stopped. My stomach clenched. He turned his flashlight toward the water, studying the ripples. Then he cursed under his breath. Putain, il a pris cette direction. Damn it, he went this way. They kept moving. I didn't breathe until their footsteps faded. Then I counted to 20 before I moved. I crawled back into the main tunnel and pushed forward, faster this time. If they were already this deep in the tunnels, it meant I was out of time. Then I saw it, the exit. A large drainage grate at the far end of the tunnel, water spilling through it in a steady trickle. The metal bars covering it were old, bent outward slightly from years of pressure. I could fit through. I had to. I ran. Behind me, the sound of shouts. They had turned back. They knew. I reached the grate and grabbed the bars, pulling with everything I had. They didn't budge. I gritted my teeth, pressing my foot against the tunnel wall for leverage, yanking harder. The metal groaned. The gap widened. Footsteps, closer now. I forced myself through the opening, my shoulders scraping against the rough metal. My shirt tore. I didn't care. I was almost out. I twisted my body, shoving myself through the final gap, just as a flashlight beam hit the wall where I had been standing seconds before. I dropped down into a shallow ditch, landing hard on my side. The impact sent a shock of pain through my ribs, but I pushed myself up and ran. I was outside the prison walls. I didn't stop. Not when I heard the guards shouting behind me. Not when I saw the distant glow of Paris ahead. I had made it this far, but I knew the truth. Escaping La Santé was just the beginning. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, a stark contrast to the stifling tunnels I had just crawled through. I was outside the walls of La Santé prison, but I wasn't safe. Not yet. I had planned every step of my escape inside. But out here, I was running blind. I sprinted along the edge of the drainage ditch, my shoes slipping in the damp earth. My prison uniform, torn, soaked, and covered in grime, was a beacon under the streetlights. If I didn't change, if I didn't disappear into the city before the full alarm went out, I wouldn't last an hour. The streets of Paris weren't far, but that was both a blessing and a curse. The city would give me places to hide, but it also meant roadblocks, police everywhere, and surveillance cameras watching every move. They'd shut down the metro. Every train station, every highway exit would be crawling with officers before dawn. I had minutes, maybe less, before the prison reported the escape to the police. That meant I had one option: vanish before they could contain me. I ran through the empty lot near the prison service road, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The pain in my ribs from the fall earlier was spreading, but I forced my body to keep moving. Pain meant nothing if I was caught. Ahead, I spotted a chain-link fence, rusted and leaning, surrounding an abandoned construction site. I didn't hesitate. I leapt, grabbing the top and pulling myself over, ignoring the sting as the metal bit into my palms. I dropped down hard on the other side, my knees buckling slightly before I pushed forward. Beyond the lot, The dim glow of streetlights marked the edge of the 14th arrondissement. The city was right there, close enough to feel the hum of traffic, distant voices, normal life. But I was anything but normal now. I was a fugitive, and they were coming. As if on cue, a loud, piercing siren erupted behind me. The prison alarm. A shiver ran through me. They knew. I ducked low, sticking to the shadows between crumbling scaffolding and piles of abandoned cement blocks. The sirens wailed in the distance, and I knew it wouldn't be long before patrol cars swept through these streets, looking for me. I needed clothes, a new identity, a place to lay low, but first I needed to keep running. I cut through a narrow alley, my mind racing. Where? Where could I go? Then I remembered. Before prison, back when my life still belonged to me, I had work construction. I had spent months working on a luxury apartment project not far from here. Unfinished, still vacant, still open if you knew where to look. I veered left, heading toward Rue Daguerre, moving fast, but not frantic. A running man looks guilty. A walking man blends in. I slowed my steps, forcing my breath under control, shoulders squared, posture calm. I had less than 10 minutes before patrols flooded the area. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to sprint. But I didn't. I walked into the city like I belonged there. Like I wasn't running for my life. Like I wasn't the most wanted man in Paris.